So I didn't prepare quite as many things, so I'll do a
That's
brief
okay.
intro. And look at that, we're live. Hello, folks who are joining us. During that joining time, I'll give a little promo for the Squirrel Squadron and introduce our fantastic guest, and then we'll get going on why weekly recruitment meetings are the worst thing anyone ever heard of. But my friend James may not agree with me. So welcome to the Squirrel Squadron. I'm Squirrel, as you might expect. And I have a special guest today, James Goodrich, the hands down the best recruiter anywhere in Europe for top tech talent. And he and I were chatting some time ago, and I expressed the vigorous view that if you have a weekly meeting with your recruiter, you're giving yourself a one-way ticket to total boredom. And he said, let's talk more about that. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, lots of you know that this is the Squirrel Squadron. That's my community of tech and non-tech people getting together. We just have had some really fantastic conversations. We had a discussion going this past week where we had a CFO weighing in on why the finance people had the same kind of problems as the engineers. We've had discussions on how fast teams can go and why that makes them feel like they're going slower. Which is a very common phenomenon. You hire more and more engineers, and suddenly you're getting less done, which is paradoxical but very common. So lots of discussions like that on the Squirrel Squadron forum. We have events like this every week, and coming up soon, we have Donna Weber, who's an expert on conversion rates and retention and all kinds of tricky metrics like that. We have a discussion on how to tell people that they're wrong without making them angry with you. So lots of fascinating topics, lots going on in the squadron. We're 1,800 strong or something like that now. So very glad to have all of you in the squadron. If you're not in it, you should join. Head over to squirrelsquadron.com. There's my advert done. And now what I want to do is really let James introduce himself. I've given my accolades for him. James is the person I rely on in every recruitment situation. If I ever want to know anything about how to hire the top CPOs, CTOs, CEOs, James is the guy I ask. And so, James, you want to say a little bit more about yourself?
Thanks, Will. That's very, very kind of you. And hello, everybody. My name's James Goodrich. I think I'd imagine I probably know quite a few people on the call potentially, but I am the founder and CEO of a company called Albany. Albany is now 12 years old as a company. We exclusively move technology and product leaders to the engineering and technology landscape in Europe. In the US, we have three facets to our business. So there's Albany Partners, which is the search firm that does exactly that. We have Albany Growth, which specializes in moving everyone below that. And we have Albany Interim that does the tech advisor piece, interim options for our clients.
So I had no idea. I just know it all as Albany. So I will now start trying to use the right branding for you.
We in actual fact, we look to try and solve the talent problems for tech and product. So it's actually
a little bit more. Think of you as James.
Yeah, that's the idea. So, and when it gets very complicated, I call it Squirrel. But no, for Squirrel and I have had a long-standing relationship, and we refer business either way, which is wonderful and a real pleasure. So thank you, Squirrel, for inviting me on this call. It's genuinely lovely working with you. You're a wonderful human, and I really rate you. So thank you so much.
Likewise. Excellent. Speaking of humans and non-humans, by the way, a dog is going to walk through this door at some point. So nobody be surprised if suddenly my wife's guide dog turns up. James is very kind and regularly contributes to guide dogs for the blind on my behalf. And that's something a charity we're both proud to support. But there's a dog who needs a home. So my wife's going to send the dog into my hotel room here as we're in transit. Right. So let's get into the meat of the conversation, because I think James and I, we were discussing before, I think we might need our guns at 10 paces, or our sabers in the fencing ring, because I'm not sure we agree. But I think we both find at least one thing frustrating. But tell me this, James. How do you feel when somebody says, now what we're going to do is go through the entire pipeline. We're going to look at everybody that we're thinking of hiring, and we're going to talk about each one for 5 minutes. Does that fill you with joy and excitement and make you think, boy, I can't wait to do that?
It's something I wouldn't agree to.
Good.
It's not a good use of time. So I think I think this is going to be.
Why do so many people do it? Sorry, we're going to get into this.
They do, and
and
that's what we're going to get into. I think, you know, we're both on the same page when it comes to the death of the weekly meeting as you understand it and as how you refer to it. So I have been running searches for the last 12 years, and a weekly meeting is, in my view, a very fundamental part of our process. Okay. However, the weekly meeting should not be used in the way it's being used or when it goes wrong, right? Where you get on the phone, no one has a clue as to what's going to be updated on, and you go through a process where you start talking about candidate profile after candidate profile, and you backdate on all that you've discussed before, so you feel like you're treading over really trodden ground. It's slow, it's frustrating, and everything else that goes with it. So, you know, for me, search is quite a simple process. Okay, a client needs to hire somebody, and they appoint you to run the process for them. Okay, so the first step of a process would be to determine what the role is, define the problem set. You need to understand what it is you're looking for, what is the parameters of that brief. You need to go through a process where the client explains to you the company, why they're exciting, what's the secret nuggets that you can use to try and attract the talent. You go through a process which we call a kickoff, but it's basically an opportunity to really understand and do a deep dive into what the client wants. It's defining that, what we call as the key evaluation criteria. So why that candidate's going to be right or wrong.
And let me say this, that's tremendously valuable. I've seen you do that, but other recruiters also do it, but not as well as you. And when I see that process happen, I see you, James, building up this great model of the company and the role and what's needed, contributing a lot to the definition of that role based on all the things you've seen. And often I'm collaborating with you and so on, and I'll chip in with my experience. And all together with the company and their knowledge and our experience, we wind up with a fantastic job description, a really clear alignment of our mission, and your team then has the right folks to look for. They know exactly where there's kind of a VP of engineering hole that you, James, will know someone who can fit. The company can say, yes, this is a fit or not. And you have a really smooth kickoff. That's fantastic. And we're going to contrast that with what happens every week afterward in the usual process.
It's so simple, right? But you know, if you know what you're looking for, then you know which direction you're going in. And I think search is, so not to deviate from the topic, Squirrel, but I think it's important to frame that because, you know, if you need to define what you're looking for, and quite often the client, by the way, doesn't necessarily know what they need. They need to be open to challenge.
And it's good they don't know. It's excellent if they know perfectly, if they have a total specification, they come to you or me and they say, you know, I want every I dotted and every T crossed that's on here. I run away. I don't know about you. But that's because they aren't bringing in the knowledge. They aren't willing to be challenged and say, well, here's what's in the market.
Yeah. And they also, through the process of a search, can sometimes change the way they think, right? And so what we do is we do a calibration process, and that calibration process is always more important than the kickoff process, because during that calibration process, you're testing their assumptions, you're testing their conclusions. So they said, we need someone with this experience, this experience, this experience. And so then we provide candidates that are slightly around the edges, not typically the best point. And then they go, you know what, James, actually, I want to index heavily on this. And actually the domain knowledge is less experience, or whatever they find. And so by doing that calibration process, you're also then really solidifying what we regard to, whatever you call it, is the key evaluation criteria. We call it the KEC. So we say, this is now what you're looking for. Everyone's on agreement of that. And what we do is then build a brief that we use. It's obviously a job description, but it's much more than that. It's how you position the company. And then we send it to all the stakeholders. Because again, the biggest problem is in the stakeholders within the business, whether it's investors, whether it's the different individuals in the company, have a slightly different view on what you're looking for. But the fundamental thing is you've got to get it right at the start as to what you're looking for. And I know we're talking
better to spend more time, and you might have an extra meeting, or you might meet one of those stakeholders if they couldn't come to the first one. Getting that right at the start is absolutely vital, and I'd much rather we spent a lot of time on that. and got it right, so that then we're showing the right candidates to the client. So totally
And
aligned with
that's
you on that. By the way, I'll just say one thing while we're saying get more input and advice. People who are here, please ask questions, interrupt us. We're going to be better if you stop us and say, hey, wait, I disagree, or we did it this way, or something else. Please jump in. So don't know if people
and
will or not, but we'll keep going.
The question we're trying to answer is, how do we avoid that terrible, prolonged weekly meeting that, by the way, it's not just you that doesn't look forward to it, Squirrel. It's the client, it's the recruiters themselves. They don't enjoy it either, right? So
Exactly.
it's not a great place to be for anybody. But the point of talking about the process at the start of the search is what the terrible weekly meeting is actually an outcome of not getting other things right. And so that's why I think it's important to talk about, once you agree on a key evaluation criteria, the weekly meeting shouldn't be about presenting candidate profiles. People think it is about that. It should be about, with the greatest respect, if you've really determined what you're looking for, and we know what you're looking for, we should be putting candidates in your diary, and the feedback, the sessions that on the weekly meetings should be about candidate feedback, what you liked and didn't like about the candidate. There shouldn't be the feeling before a client meeting where you go, oh, have they got somebody? Please tell me they've got somebody. And the client thinking the same thing, and the poor recruiters cobbling together what they can to try and, in a defensive manner, try and. So that's the bit. I 100% agree with you that is just stick your pins in your eyes, horrible for everyone on that call.
Exactly. And the worst is I really like when you say, because you've really been in these where you're cobbling it together before. So if both the client is suddenly sending the feedback half an hour before the meeting, and the recruiter is suddenly sending 5 profiles, nothing's happened all week, but then, suddenly here are 5 profiles 10 minutes before the meeting, I say, oh my God, we're doing this completely wrong.
And the relationship's broken down. Yeah.
Precisely. And it's breaking down more as you go.
Yeah, it only goes one way. When it gets there, you've got to stop that cycle. You've got to say, guys, it's got to stop.
Yeah.
Either we part ways, or we change the way this is operating, because at that point it is only going to get to one outcome. And what happens is that the recruiters are then geared towards the weekly meetings. So every part of their activity is not about finding a great candidate for your role.
It's performance.
It's about trying to defend against what questions they're going to get asked on the weekly meeting.
You got it. Okay. It's like I'm about to get on an airplane here. That's why I'm in not my normal 600-year-old house, but a hotel in London on my way. And when you go to the airport, you get this security theater, right? You get this stuff where you take off your shoes and your belt and your something else. And, the number of terrorists that catches is minuscule, and the number of people it inconveniences is huge. But people feel better, right? As they say, well, at least I'm doing this thing. At least I'm doing something. At least something's happening here. And when you're saying that about a recruitment meeting, it's got to be the most depressing thing in the world. You're spending this huge amount of money. You've got this huge number of people. Typically there's 8, 10, 20, 15 people in this session, virtual or physical, and everybody's sitting there looking at each profile, and you think, oh my God, what kind of human waste is this? When in fact, what you could be doing, exactly as you say, James, is looking at the feedback, looking at what's happening with those candidates. How are they moving forward? And you don't have to only do that once a week.
But I mean, for me, you shouldn't be presenting the candidate on the call unless there's something you want to talk about, right? So you go, look, this candidate's come up. It actually doesn't fit the K evaluation criteria as we discussed. But I think you might. Yeah. I think you might be interesting, and this is why. So the weekly team meeting calls can be for discussion of feedback of candidates. They can be discussion of search process. You could ultimately what happens again in a search process is they define what they're looking for. That creates a pool of talent that you can go after. Okay. Sometimes, and the mistake a lot of search firms I think make is they make that pool too narrow. And what they then do is
they believe the client. Because the client says you have to have 7.2 years of this piece of software.
You have to have led a team 3 times over. Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
And they
never
go,
believe the
AI, no problem. Yeah, and they go, right, I'll go and find that. And what you've done then is you've set the expectation. So it's actually about expectation setting. A search process is absolutely collaborative. And any client going into, I don't know whether we've got clients on the call or we've got recruiters on the call or whether we've got.
So we've got all the Squirrel Squadron has everything.
Okay, so for me, if you're a client going into a search process, first and foremost, you have to be willing to give it the time, energy up front to make sure that you've been very well briefed, you've been very open. You need to be open to be challenged, because you'll have a preconceived idea of the market. You have, the recruiter you choose, you have to trust that they know what they're talking about. Because if they don't, then the whole thing's broken down from the outset, right? But if you've appointed that firm to run that search for you, you've got to trust that they know what they're doing, they know the market they're operating in, the information they provide you with in terms of the context to the candidates coming through, either the cadence or the people, are related to the work that they're doing, right? So it's backed up by data. So it's never a question where they go, look, are you working hard enough? Or, that typical line that a recruiter gives, there's a shortness of candidates in the marketplace.
If I hear that one more time, I'm going to scream. I've never heard it from you. No. I never hear you say, look, there's just not the people out there. There's nothing I can do. I hear you say, there's a shortage of people with this skill or this location.
So it's never short of
and here's what we can be flexible on.
Yes, that's what you need. Mr. Client, or Mrs. Client, what would you be flexible on? Ultimately, we've gone to market for your brief, and this is what we can show you. This is the area that you can see. We're telling you if your cadence on candidates is going to be this in this market, because now the only factor that's going to change availability on candidates is time. So you now have to expand that hoop. You have to expand that profile. So for me, when you hear there's a shortness of candidates, they are
run away.
The client is the poor recruiter at that point is just got nothing else to give, because what they're typically avoiding at that point is the ability to challenge the client and say, client, you're not listening to what we're saying. Here's the data that backs up the research we've done. So for me, it's quite simple, but you have to be capable enough or confident enough in your market knowledge to be able to speak to the client in the way that you should do.
Exactly, and give them information. For example, we've got a comment here from Mike on YouTube, and Mike says, yeah, we're looking for 28 plus years of ChatGPT experience. And you would people would probably be smart enough not to do that particular one, but man, I've heard equally ridiculous statements from perfectly reasonable clients. It's not because the client is doing the wrong thing. They say, I'm looking for somebody who's deeply experienced in artificial intelligence. That's what they really mean. And they don't know enough technically, and they need somebody like me to give them the technical knowledge, and you, James, to give them the market knowledge, to say, hang on, that's not available. What you're asking for isn't available. What you say you want isn't available, but what you need is over here. And that's the distance where we can add value, and where any good process is going to add value, because it's going to bring you people you didn't expect. James, I don't have something I normally have with me, but if people look on the follow-up post to this, I will post a picture of it. I have a wonderful driftwood piece of art. It's a wonderful owl. And I'll put up the picture. I just realized this moment I didn't bring it with me here for my trip. But I have that owl because it illustrates a principle that I like to use, and I'm interested in what you think about it, because it goes exactly to this point. The principle is the driftwood principle. And I hold up the owl and I say, what did not happen is the artist who made this beautiful piece of artwork did not go down to the beach and say, I have this owl in my brain, and I'm going to go find a piece of wood that looks like the owl in my brain. That didn't happen. The person went to the beach and said, I wonder what interesting wood I will find today. Well, that one over there could look like an owl, and I'm going to take it. And I was interested in birds anyway, but now I have something that can turn into an owl, and then made this beautiful piece of art. And that's what tech recruiting is like.
And I think
every time you find a piece of wood on the beach that isn't what you expected, but is what you need.
It solves your problem. So I think that's fantastic, Squirrel. I think, so your job as the recruiter is to advise the client that they might hire what they didn't think they were going to hire. Ultimately, we know them. If you know your functional specialism well, you can also advise them as to, quite often, I think sometimes search firms don't quite know their market, the generalists don't know the market space so well. So, for instance, if someone was coming to us saying, we need someone who's an unbelievably good mathematical mind, algorithms, data scientist, type-esque AI, absolute expert. Oh, and by the way, they need to be the most emotionally great leader, along with, and really good on product. So we could say, look, you are now hiring 3 different people. you either index on one or the other or whatever. You know, there are people that do exist, absolutely, that sit across multiple functions. But if you want to go deep in one of those,
one per 6 months.
yeah,
You're not going to find a volume that will let you
exactly.
actually hire.
It's just knowing. But having done this a long time and seeing how clients end up with fantastic hires, it's exactly that analogy, Squirrel, which is, whilst you have a view on what you want to hire, be really open, because some of the best people out there don't fit every single bit that you're asking for, but the amount of value they can add and bring a client is so exciting. So I think, yeah, just I wouldn't make the briefs so narrow. I'd make them more generalist and trust the firm to bring in the best of the best, because when the search is narrow, we have to discount all those candidates around these edges, which we think are absolutely fantastic.
And worth looking at. I'll just tell one really brief story, which I know you'll like, James. And this is about a Squirrel Squadron member. I won't give his full name, but if he's around, he's welcome to say hi. Marcus worked with me at one of my clients and is now a product manager at one of the big companies. Everyone on this call will know them. And I met him at a small startup that was going places, and where I was consulting. But where he came from is a signalman at Network Rail. So he was managing the people who pull the levers and make sure that the sign, the light goes red so the train doesn't go through the signal, which is an extremely important safety job, right? Very, very valuable, but nothing to do with technology. And he was on a train one day going from one signal place to another signal place. I don't understand signalmen's lives very well. And he said, I'm bored, and I know there's lots of things that we do that this technology could probably help with. And I have this phone in my pocket. I wonder what I could do with this phone. And he taught himself to build apps. He found one of those tools that let relatively non-technical people build apps. And by the time he finished this long train journey across the country, he built an app that signalmen could use. And he went off and showed it to the signalman, and they said, this is the greatest thing ever, right? Instead of having to, I don't know what they were using, Morse code or something, to communicate with each other. And suddenly they had this thing that could handle a problem for them. Network Rail made him the head of the apps department, which hadn't existed before. So he became in charge of the apps department. Then he went to this startup that needed a completely different area, nothing to do with trains. Worked with me for a while, and we had a blast together. And then he went off to one of the giant firms, and I keep trying to drag him out because I keep wanting him to be in these other environments. Now, you wouldn't have said to yourself, man, what I need here in my fintech company is somebody who used to pull signal levers and taught himself to build apps. But oh my God, what an amazing person, right? Yeah. And that's the kind of thinking you need, and that's the kind of person James can find for you. So I'm just going to big you up again, James, because you're so good at finding this kind of person. And I think clients don't think of it. They don't think of it ahead of time.
I think it's also that the network that you have as well provides the people that come through, right? So, it's not just the search firm saying, we think this person's great. It's actually, the expert network that we have will say this person is a real special person. And so we can say it with a little bit more conviction, the soft references we take, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I think...
And often you've worked with them for a long time, and this is true of other recruiters as well that I've worked with who have been high quality. The low quality ones are the ones who just start dialing for dollars all day, and they're pounding away on LinkedIn. And we've all gotten those emails that say, hey, isn't this a wonderful job for you? And you're like, who the heck are you? And this is a terrible job for me. Those folks are just trying to play a numbers game. Whereas the people who are really excellent, like James, have long-term relationships, and they'll say, yeah, I placed this person 10 years ago, and then I placed them 5 years later, and then I saw they went to someplace else, and I think I can drag them out again. So that's the tenor of the discussion you want to have in your regular meeting with somebody like James.
There's someone I'm trying to place at the moment for the fourth time, so I'm delighted. But
that's the best thing. Help them move and get to know them, and then you can be such a more valuable asset to the client.
Thank you, Squirrel. I think, from about the weekly meeting, I think if you're in that place right now where you're having a weekly meeting that is that way inclined, you've got to stop. You've got to stop it. You've got to have a conversation where you go,
falling asleep and
this isn't working.
Chair. Yeah.
So let's either rethink and redo the way this works. But the weekly meeting needs to be a very collaborative, enjoyable get together. Like, the bit that I think that you need to stress is that this should be a breath of fresh air. It should be a chance for the poor CEO that's running around 1,000 miles an hour to go, okay, I've got some time to really talk about one of my key problems that I'm trying to fix right now. What can I do? What's going well? And where the weekly meeting gets really exciting is when you've got 2 or 3 candidates you really like, and you go, I can't decide which one to hire, or I really want to hire this person. How do we strategize to land that candidate? Should I send an email before the weekend? Shall I send his So that's the benefit of the weekly calls. It's not because
James, can I try something on you? Can I just try something radical on you? Because I'm all about, what I do with tech teams often is to help them not just deliver every 2 weeks or every week, but every day. And I get them to just get the cadence much faster. So I've not managed to get any folks to do this with recruitment, but couldn't you have more frequent, but shorter? Couldn't you have 10 minutes every couple days where you go through and it's really exciting and you're motivated and you're like, let's email this person? Why couldn't you do that?
I think you need calls. So the weekly calls are in the diary, so it holds people accountable, right? The communication should be real time. So we typically have a Slack channel or a WhatsApp channel, which is basically the moment I get off the phone to a candidate that I think is great for the role, the client is already aware and they're excited about them. And actually, the client will make us aware of the feedback of a candidate as well, but we can discuss it in more detail if I need to have it. So the weekly meeting is not about updating the search process. The weekly meeting is an opportunity to discuss, are we going the right direction? What can we do differently? How can we help better? And so what at the moment, your weekly meetings that you're suffering with are just composed of the wrong stuff. It's because fundamentally the relationship between the search firm and the brief and the client has broken down completely. And so I would encourage you, and not to say that I have not been in that situation, because I have. And
we all have.
So well,
we got to listen to the signal. That's the key thing. It's
telling us something. And so, I genuinely have been there, and I'm thinking, this is not where I want to be. And you're in that defensive mode. Everyone's not enjoying this place. And the last time I was in that place, I picked the phone up to the client and said, this doesn't carry on. Like we either move on away from here, or we change the way this process is. But it's like we're coming to a war zone and trying to defend ourselves. And my team, you're not getting the best out of the team at all. They are literally just trying to defend against your bullets. And so, I would say, so in summary, I would say a search process needs to be real time. It needs to be defined up front, so it's very, very clear on what you're looking for, and that might change and morph over the course of the search, and that's a good thing as you get closer to the outcome. Both parties need to be positive going into the energy needs to go into a call, needs to be really positive. I love your idea that calls that if we don't have anything to update the client on because we've got 2 interviews lined up, we don't have the meeting.
Exactly,
there's no point having the meeting. So,
and what you want is that continuous interaction. By the way, we're coming to the end here, and I'll just invite people to ask us questions and challenge us. You see that James and I don't necessarily agree completely, but you may have different experience. I'd love to hear that from anybody here on this call. But what should be happening is exciting interactions like I think James and I are having. At least I'm having a blast here, figuring this out and thinking with you, James, because you're so smart. You've done so much of this. Okay. And that's what should be happening every day in that Slack channel or in your emails or your WhatsApp or on the phone or whatever you're doing, as you collaboratively say, okay, I've got this person and I have to move quickly with them. And can we get them, and who should they meet, and can we test them on this? That's what should be happening. And then the weekly meeting actually is a bit more like what us engineers would call a retrospective.
Yeah.
And when you mix it up and you have your retrospective where you look back at what you're doing, actually be your planning meeting, which is what we're describing, where you're planning what you're going to do and you go through each thing, that you've got it all mixed up. That's not how it should work. That we wouldn't put up with that in technology. We would put up with that in an engineering team. For some reason, we put up with it in recruitment, and we're nuts. Argue with us, by the way, folks, if you want to. Go ahead, James.
No, I agree with that totally. So I think we're finally getting on the same page on this, Grill, which is I wouldn't stop the weekly meeting. I would change what the weekly meeting is about, and actually not have it if it's not appropriate. No one likes speaking to recruiters unless you need to, but actually I'd argue that they do, because it's enjoyable. And
this is enjoyable, right? You should be doing something that feels like this.
You have the relationship, and and that's the bit that gives me the most enjoyment, actually, is to see the process work with a client where they're going, this is, and actually that happens after the process, right? So they still find reasons to message you and talk to you, and and that means that you added value to the process. So, not to say that we are perfect. We are not. We've made the mistake of defining too narrow a brief. We've made the mistake of trying to appease a client by giving them the answers to a solution that we know is incredibly difficult and setting the wrong expectations. So we've made that mistake. But if you are making that mistake, stop.
Yep.
Just
Absolutely.
stop and
let me just note one other really big advantage, which I realized we didn't mention, which is if you can do this much more responsively, if you can do this in the equivalent to what I would call elephant carpaccio, delivering your software every day, we're delivering progress on the clients every day. It means you can move fast in the market. And yes, there's recessions and other things, but the tech market has been hot and certainly a seller's market. In other words, favoring the candidates for the last 25 years that I've been active in it. It just varies a little bit in how much that's true. So the best candidates move really fast. And if you're waiting for a weekly cadence where you say, okay, fine, let's move Squirrel to the next step, Squirrel may have a new job by then.
Yeah.
And so when you can be immediately responsive and not waiting for a weekly meeting, you can move faster and have an advantage in the market. Plus, then you can save your weekly interactions for this kind of retrospective stuff. And if you don't need it, you don't need it. But then you're going through, wait a minute, are we looking for the right candidate? Should be looking for more driftwood. Are we finding what we're looking for? Rather than this kind of droning through every profile and defensively trying to show that you have enough people. It's nuts. Okay.
Brave hirers hire the best, for sure.
There we go. Excellent. Yeah. James, let's stop there rather than keep going for too long. I know we've had some interesting folks on here, and there'll be more comments in the Squirrel Squadron forum. James, where do people go if they want to find you?
Albany Partners, www.albanypartners.co.uk. But reach out to my LinkedIn profile as well.
Oh, we have a late question. Let's go to that. So Kieran asks, James, who is the best CEO that you've worked with on recruiting, and what did they do that set them apart? That's just such a great question. James, are you able to stick around for a few minutes and answer that?
Yeah, of course. God,
we're making question. James think. Take your time, James. There's no rush. Kieran's asking a good, tough question.
I've worked with a lot. Who's made some great hires? I think it'd be inappropriate for me to say a name, but I think
no, don't do that.
The experience, the person that I think made a brilliant hire was they were what do they do well? This was operating in a market that was really difficult to land people, right? So that's relevant. So it is appropriate. I think that they took the time to really make us believe so strongly in what they were building, right? So we were going to market like we were a shareholder, like we believed in that product so much. It wasn't mission-led. It was just a great business going in a great direction. They wanted a absolutely superstar. So I'd say what he did very well was really invest time to make us feel. We flew over to Germany. We spent time with him. He showcased the whole business. He made us feel like, how important this was. It was like we felt really.
He aligned with you at the beginning, as we talked about.
Yes, it was the alignment.
You had a really clear, not only brief but alignment. So it's not like you had a bunch of words and 7.2 years of GCP or something like that. You had
really attached.
Yeah. So valuable. So you could look for the right driftwood for him.
Exactly, and then the second thing he did, I think the middle of the process was okay for him, but I think that again, when he landed on a candidate that we didn't think we were going to get, the strategizing that we used, the level of detail that we went to get that candidate over the line. He had other offers on the go at the table, and we worked tirelessly to make sure. And I don't know if I'm saying, but he actually sent the client, as well as taking his wife out for dinner, because that's where the problem was on the candidate side in terms of moving to Germany. He actually sent the contract in a model of the product that the company offer, and I can't tell you more than that because I give it away.
That's okay, don't worry. Yeah, but
it was literally a scroll. It was a scroll with a pen inside a glass boxed version of their product, and it was and it worked. And
Amazing.
So for me, I mean, I think that's a bit of an extreme example, but I've done a lot.
You got to be creative in these markets where you're looking for these superstars with amazing skills. You want to hire, you were saying before, somebody with great mathematical skills, with data engineering and knowledge of large language models. You're not going to even get to talk to a person like that unless you're approaching them with a lot of creativity and a lot of this mission approach, this idea that your business is the one that's going to make their career take off. That's so exciting.
Just to finish that, I think the question you're asking, I forget the name of the person, but
Kieran,
the question you're asking was what can you do well as a CEO to try and land someone? I think investment up front and really working with a headhunter to get the when you're trying to land a candidate, it's the collaboration piece. It will have a massive impact on your hire.
There we go. Makes sense. Well, Kieran, thanks for a great question. Really appreciate that. Let me get, Kieran says he needs to buy more glass models. Perfect. Okay. So here's how you find James. And I recommend him to all my clients when they ask me who's the best for hiring CTOs, CPOs, CTPOs, any tech executive.
And now the level below, right? So we do everything below as well in terms of ordinary growth as a separate business. Yeah.
I need to get your branding right. So get in touch with James for sure. And then, of course, you can also get in touch with me over at Squirrel Squadron. And like I said, we have several different events coming up soon. We have one on retaining people, making sure that your clients actually stick around and you make more money from them. How can tech help you with that? We have one on how to tell people they're wrong, which is one of my favorite topics. People are always asking, how can I convince someone about this? I have some different ideas about how to do that. So those are events coming up in the rest of August, and they're always free because it's my way of giving back. And we can get tech and non-tech people working together just as we have here. And a great model of how to do that, James. And really appreciate you coming along to participate with us today. So see everybody next week at the next event. And James, have a wonderful day. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.